Hello everyone. Today, Biker Justice Analyst bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. Enjoy listening.
20 doctors failed to save Hell's Angel. Then the maid surprisingly steps in and instantly heals him. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the stark hospital room as Hank McAllister shifted uncomfortably in his bed. His massive frame, once intimidating on his Harley, now seemed diminished against the white sheets. The medical machines beeped steadily beside him, their rhythm a constant reminder of his current predicament. Lisa's heels clicked against the linoleum floor as she paced. Her business suit was wrinkled from spending hours at the hospital, and dark circles had formed under her eyes. She glanced at her father, trying to hide her worry behind a mask of professionalism. "Would you stop that pacing?" Hank's voice came out rougher than he intended. "You're making me dizzy." Lisa paused mid-stride, her arms crossed. "Well, excuse me for being concerned about my father's mysterious illness." Before Hank could respond, another team of doctors filed into the room. This group made number 17. Or was it 18? He'd lost count. The lead physician, Dr. Reynolds, carried a thick folder of test results. "Mr. McAllister," Dr. Reynolds began, adjusting his glasses. "We've reviewed your latest round of tests." Hank's weathered hands gripped the bedsheet, his tattoo-covered arms, telling stories of his wilder days, now seemed to mock his current weakness. "Just give it to me straight, Doc." The doctor cleared his throat. "Your symptoms are puzzling. The fever, the irregular heartbeat, the unexplained pain, they don't form any pattern we recognize." Lisa stepped closer to the bed. "There has to be something you can do. Some specialist we haven't tried?" "We've consulted with experts across several fields," another doctor chimed in. "Cardiology, neurology, infectious diseases. Nobody can pinpoint the cause." Hank let out a heavy sigh. He'd been through countless blood draws, scans, and examinations. Each time the doctors left with more questions than answers. His body, which had survived bar fights and motorcycle crashes, was now failing him in ways he couldn't understand. "So what you're saying is," Hank's voice cracked slightly, "you don't know what's wrong with me?" The doctors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward. "We're continuing to monitor your condition, Mr. McAllister. We'll run more tests." "More tests?" Lisa interrupted, her professional composure cracking. "That's all you've been doing for weeks. My father is getting worse and you're just—" She stopped, running her hands through her hair in frustration. Hank watched his daughter, seeing glimpses of her mother in her determined stance. May would have known how to handle this situation. She always knew what to say, how to bring peace to chaos. But May was gone, and he and Lisa were left trying to navigate this uncertainty alone. The team of doctors huddled around his bed, reviewing charts and suggesting various treatments, none of which seemed promising. Their medical jargon blurred together as Hank felt the weight of helplessness settle over him. Finally, the doctors began filing out of the room, their white coats a parade of defeat. Dr. Reynolds lingered at the doorway. "We'll check on you again tomorrow, Mr. McAllister." As the door closed behind them, silence filled the room. Lisa stood at the window, her back to her father, shoulders tense. Hank stared at the ceiling, feeling more vulnerable than he had in his entire life. Even in his darkest days with the motorcycle gang, he'd always felt in control. Now, lying in this hospital bed, he felt completely powerless. The machines continued their steady beeping, a rhythm that seemed to mock the uncertainty of his situation. No answers, no solutions, just the endless waiting for something, anything, to make sense of what was happening to him. Mary Lou pushed her cleaning cart down the fluorescent-lit hallway of the hospital's east wing, her rubber-soled shoes making soft, squeaking sounds against the polished floor. The cart's wheels needed oiling. They creaked with each step, but she hardly noticed anymore. After 15 years of working here, the sounds had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. She paused near the nurse's station, spraying disinfectant on a handrail. 2 doctors stood nearby, their voices carrying clearly in the quiet corridor. "The McAllister case. I've never seen anything like it," the younger doctor said, shaking his head. 20 specialists and still no answers. The older doctor sighed. "His vitals are getting worse by the day. If we can't figure this out soon—" Mary Lou's hand stilled on the handrail. She'd cleaned enough rooms, seen enough patients come and go to know what that trailing silence meant. Her heart ached at the thought of another soul suffering without hope. "Room 412, the younger doctor continued. "That old biker with all the tattoos. Looks tough as nails, but whatever this is, it's eating him alive." Mary Lou glanced down the hallway toward room 412. Something stirred in her chest, a familiar feeling she'd learned to trust over the years. It was like a gentle tug on her spirit, the kind that had led her to so many patients in need of more than just medical care. She wheeled her cart slowly down the corridor, past rooms 408, 409, 410. The feeling grew stronger with each step. Through the window of room 412, she could see a large man in the bed, his arms covered in faded tattoos. A business-dressed woman, his daughter perhaps, dozed in a chair nearby. Mary Lou knocked softly on the door frame before entering. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I'm here to clean." The man, Mr. McAllister, turned his head slightly. His eyes were tired, but they still held a spark of defiance. The woman stirred but didn't wake. Mary Lou began her routine, emptying trash bins and wiping surfaces. But instead of keeping her usual silence, she found herself humming softly, an old hymn her mother used to sing. The melody filled the room like gentle sunshine. "That's pretty," Mr. McAllister said, gruffly, surprising them both. Mary Lou smiled warmly at him. "My mama used to sing it to me when I was sick." She moved closer to his bed, wiping down the bedside table. "I'm Mary Lou." "Hank," he replied, his voice rough but less harsh than before. She noticed the untouched food tray beside him. "Hospital food's not much to look forward to, is it?" She adjusted his water pitcher, making sure it was within easy reach. "But you need your strength." Hank's expression softened slightly at her gentle concern. "Don't much see the point anymore." "There's always a point, Mr. McAllister," Mary Lou said softly, her kind eyes meeting his. "Sometimes we just need help seeing it." She straightened his blanket with practiced care, her movements slow and deliberate. Hank watched her, seemingly unsure how to respond to such simple kindness. His weathered face showed confusion, as if gentleness was a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Mary Lou continued her work, her presence filling the room with a peaceful quiet that felt different from the usual hospital silence. She moved with purpose, but unhurried, each action infused with care and attention. The morning sun filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across Hank's room. Mary Lou arrived earlier than usual, her cart's familiar squeak announcing her presence before she appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, Mr. McAllister," she said softly, mindful of the early hour. Hank was already awake, staring at the ceiling with tired eyes. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice gravelly from lack of sleep. Dark circles hung under his eyes, evidence of another restless night. Mary Lou began her usual cleaning routine, starting with the window ledge. She worked methodically, humming that same gentle hymn from yesterday. The sound seemed to fill the empty spaces in the room, making it feel less clinical, more human. "Rough night?" she asked, noticing how he winced when shifting position. Hank grunted in response. same as all the others. He watched as she moved around his room with careful precision, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Mary Lou nodded sympathetically, wiping down the bedside table. "My Henry, that's my late husband. He used to have trouble sleeping too." She adjusted the flowers Lisa had brought yesterday, removing the wilted ones. Sometimes just having someone nearby helped him rest easier. As she worked her way around the room, Mary Lou's movements slowed. She paused near the foot of Hank's bed, her hand resting lightly on the rail. Her eyes closed, and her lips moved in silent prayer. There was nothing showy about it, just a quiet moment between her daily tasks. Hank watched her, his expression softening slightly. He'd seen plenty of people pray over him these past weeks, chaplains, nurses, even his daughter Lisa. But there was something different about Mary Lou's prayer. No dramatic gestures or loud proclamations, just simple, genuine care. "Lord," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "this good man needs your healing touch. Guide the doctor's hands and ease his pain. Amen." She resumed her cleaning as if nothing had happened, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted somehow. Hank felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he couldn't explain. It spread slowly, like sunshine breaking through clouds. The constant pain that had been his companion for weeks seemed to dim slightly. His heartbeat, which had been erratic for days, settled into a steady rhythm. The monitors beside his bed beeped more regularly. Mary Lou emptied the trash bin and replaced the liner, still humming her hymn. Hank found himself watching her, trying to make sense of what was happening. He'd never been one for religion or spiritual matters. That had always been May's department. But this feeling must be the new medication, he muttered to himself, trying to find a logical explanation. Yet he couldn't shake the timing, how the warmth had spread through him just as Mary Lou had finished her prayer. She glanced at him with knowing eyes as she prepared to leave, pushing her cart toward the door. "Sometimes," she said softly, "medicine comes in different forms, Mr. McAllister." Hank lay there, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the unusual absence of pain. He wanted to dismiss it all as coincidence, but something about Mary Lou's quiet faith made him wonder. For the first time in weeks, he felt something besides despair, a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. The afternoon light had faded from Hank's hospital room, replaced by the harsh fluorescent glow that made everything look sickly and pale. The machines beeped with increasing frequency, their rhythm matching Hank's deteriorating condition. Lisa stood by her father's bed, her fingers clutching a stack of papers so tightly they crumpled at the edges. "I don't understand," she said to the doctor, her voice tight with frustration. "Yesterday he seemed better. How could this happen so suddenly?" Dr. Matthews shook his head, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Sometimes these conditions are unpredictable. The latest test results show a significant decline in organ function." Hank lay still, his large frame seeming smaller somehow against the white hospital sheets. His tattoos stood out stark against his pale skin, and his beard, usually so neatly trimmed, had grown wild during his hospital stay. His breathing came in shallow gasps. "We've tried everything," Dr. Matthews continued, his tone gentle but clinical. "I think it's time we discuss comfort care options. I can recommend several excellent hospice facilities." "Hospice?" Lisa interrupted, her voice cracking. She ran a hand through her disheveled hair, pacing the small space between the bed and the window. "No, there has to be something else we can try. More tests, different medications, anything." The doctor's expression remained sympathetic but firm. "We've consulted with 20 specialists. Ms. McAllister, we've run every test twice. Sometimes we have to accept that—" "Accept what?" Lisa snapped. That you're giving up on him? That none of you know what you're doing?" She turned away, wiping angry tears from her eyes. Hank stirred slightly, his hand twitching on the blanket. "Lisa," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's okay, kid." "It's not okay, Dad," she said, moving to his side. "Nothing about this is okay." The familiar squeak of wheels announced Mary Lou's arrival. She pushed her cleaning cart into the room quietly, her presence almost unnoticed amid the tension. She began her work as usual, but her movements were slower, more deliberate. Dr. Matthews excused himself, promising to return later with the hospice information. Lisa sank into the chair beside Hank's bed, her head in her hands. Mary Lou worked her way around the room, her routine unchanged, but her expression troubled. As she approached Hank's bed, she paused. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out something small and silver, a medallion on a simple chain. "This was my grandmother's," she whispered, carefully placing it on Hank's pillow. "She always said it brought healing to those who needed it most." Her fingers lingered on the medallion as she closed her eyes in prayer. "Lord, this man needs your touch. His body is failing, but you are stronger than any illness. Please bring your healing power to him now." The steady beeping of the heart monitor suddenly changed its rhythm. Lisa's head snapped up, fear crossing her face, but the beeps weren't getting faster or more erratic. Instead, they were settling into a strong, steady pattern. Color began returning to Hank's cheeks. His breathing eased, becoming deeper and more regular. The numbers on the various monitors started shifting, trending toward normal ranges. Lisa stared at the displays in disbelief. "What's happening?" Dr. Matthews rushed back in, summoned by the change in vital signs. He checked the monitors, then examined Hank directly, his professional detachment giving way to obvious confusion. "This is unexpected," he said, reviewing the readings again. "His numbers are stabilizing. All of them. I've never seen anything like this." Dr. Matthews stood at the foot of Hank's bed, flipping through pages of test results with trembling hands. 3 other doctors huddled around him, pointing at numbers and shaking their heads in disbelief. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. "These readings make no sense," Dr. Matthews muttered, adjusting his glasses. "Just an hour ago, your organs were showing signs of failure. Now—" He trailed off, studying the monitors again. Lisa perched on the edge of her chair, her eyes darting between her father and the doctors. The worry lines on her face had softened slightly, but tension still pulled at her shoulders. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means," another doctor chimed in, "that your father's condition has improved dramatically. His vital signs are stabilizing, and his organ function appears to be normalizing." Hank lay quietly in his bed, his large frame no longer seeming quite so diminished. The color had returned to his face, and his breathing came easier now. The medallion Mary Lou had left still rested on his pillow, catching occasional glints of sunlight. "I don't understand," Hank grumbled, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "You all said there was nothing you could do. Now suddenly I'm getting better?" His thick fingers absently traced the tattoos on his arm, a habit he'd developed when feeling uncertain. The doctors continued their discussion in hushed tones, occasionally glancing at Hank with puzzled expressions. One by one, they filed out of the room, promising to return with more tests and observations. When they were alone, Hank turned to Lisa. "That cleaning lady," he said hesitantly. "The one who comes in here every day, Mary Lou. What do you know about her?" Lisa shifted in her chair, smoothing her wrinkled blouse. "Not much. The nurses say she's worked here for years, always quiet, always kind." She paused, studying her father's face. Why? Hank's weathered features creased in thought. She prayed over me, he said gruffly. Right before all this happened. He gestured vaguely at the monitors. And she left this. He picked up the medallion, turning it over in his calloused hands. Dad, Lisa said gently, are you suggesting that Mary Lou had something to do with your recovery? Hank's face reddened slightly under his thick beard. Course not, he said gruffly, dropping the medallion back onto the pillow. Just seems strange is all. 1 minute I'm practically on my deathbed, the next. He shook his head. But she's just a janitor. Probably just a coincidence. Lisa leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The nurses call her the hospital angel, she offered. They say she has a way of bringing comfort to patients when they need it most. Hospital angel? Hank scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual bite. That's ridiculous. She mops floors and empties trash cans. Nothing magical about that. He shifted uncomfortably in his bed, trying to dismiss the warmth he'd felt when Mary Lou had prayed over him. Maybe, Lisa agreed, watching her father carefully. But you have to admit, the timing is interesting. Hank grunted and closed his eyes, effectively ending the conversation. But his hand crept up to touch the medallion once more, its metal warm against his fingers. The morning sun filtered through the hospital window, casting a warm glow across Hank's bed. His vital signs had stabilized enough that the doctors had removed several monitoring devices, leaving his arms free from the tangle of wires. Lisa sat in her usual chair, watching her father with a mix of relief and concern. Your color's better today, she said, noting the healthy pink that had returned to his cheeks. Hank nodded, absently rubbing his beard. Feel stronger too. Might even try walking down the hall later. The door opened quietly, and Mary Lou entered with her cleaning cart. She smiled warmly at them both, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Good morning, she said softly, beginning her daily routine. Lisa watched as her father's demeanor shifted subtly. His shoulders relaxed, and the permanent scowl he usually wore softened. It was a change she'd noticed happening more frequently when Mary Lou was around. Morning, Mary Lou, Hank replied, his gruff voice gentler than usual. You don't need to clean around me today. I can get up. Now don't you go pushing yourself too hard, Mary Lou cautioned, moving efficiently around the room. Recovery takes time. Lisa stood, gathering her purse. I need to make some calls for work. I'll be back in an hour, Dad. She hesitated at the door, watching as Mary Lou and her father exchanged knowing looks. Something had developed between them, a connection she couldn't quite understand. After Lisa left, Hank cleared his throat. Been meaning to tell you something, he said, fiddling with the medallion she'd given him, about why I ended up here. Mary Lou paused in her work, giving him her full attention. Sometimes talking helps heal the heart, she said simply. Years ago I was different, Hank began, his voice rough with emotion. Ran with a motorcycle gang. Did things I ain't proud of. After May, my wife, passed, I pushed everyone away, especially Lisa. He swallowed hard. Guess I figured if I kept people at arm's length, losing them wouldn't hurt so much. Mary Lou pulled up a chair, her movements unhurried. Loss changes us all differently, she said. When my Robert passed, I was so angry at God. Couldn't understand why he'd take my husband, leaving me alone with a young son to raise. Hank looked at her with surprise. He'd never imagined this gentle woman carrying such pain. How'd you get through it? One day at a time, she answered, smoothing her uniform. Found strength I didn't know I had. Learned that sometimes the biggest miracles come disguised as ordinary moments. She smiled softly. Like cleaning hospital rooms. Hank felt something shift inside him, a wall he'd built years ago beginning to crumble. Never thought I'd be sitting here pouring my heart out to... He stopped, embarrassed. To a cleaning lady? Mary Lou finished, her eyes twinkling. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Mr. McAllister. Sometimes he sends angels in work uniforms with mops and buckets. A chuckle escaped Hank's lips, surprising them both. Lisa mentioned they call you the hospital angel. He studied her face, seeing beyond the humble exterior to the quiet strength beneath. Maybe they're right. Mary Lou stood, returning to her cart. Angels or not, we're all just trying to find our way through the dark times. Sometimes all it takes is someone to walk beside us, holding a little light. Hank watched her work, the medallion warm in his hand. For the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope, small but steady, like a candle flame in the darkness. Hank sat on the edge of his hospital bed, fully dressed for the first time in weeks. His weathered leather jacket felt loose on his frame. He'd lost weight during his illness, but putting it on gave him a sense of returning to himself. The discharge papers lay signed on the bedside table, full of medical terms that tried to explain his inexplicable recovery. Lisa stood by the window, her arms crossed, watching as a nurse removed the last of his personal items from the drawers. The doctors still can't explain it, she said, her voice carrying a mix of relief and uncertainty. They're calling it spontaneous remission. Hank grunted, running his hand over the medallion that now hung around his neck. The small piece of metal had become a comfort to him, though he'd never admit it out loud. Doctors don't know everything, he muttered. Dr. Peterson entered the room, clipboard in hand. Well, Mr. McAllister, you've certainly given us something to write about in the medical journals. He smiled, though his eyes showed his professional confusion. Whatever happened here, you're one lucky man. Thank you, Doc, Hank replied, but his eyes drifted to the doorway, hoping to catch a glimpse of Mary Lou's cart. He hadn't seen her this morning, and something felt unfinished. Lisa gathered his belongings into a duffel bag. Dad, we should get going. I've got the car pulled up front. Her voice was caring, but distant, still carrying the weight of years of emotional separation. As Hank stood, steadying himself, his cell phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, surprised to see the hospital's internal number. Hello? Mr. McAllister? Mary Lou's soft voice came through the speaker. I heard you were leaving today. Mary Lou, he said, his gruff voice softening. Lisa looked up at the name, her expression complicated. I was hoping to see you before I left. There was a pause on the line. I wanted to tell you something, Mary Lou continued. I've been offered a position at St. Michael's Hospital across town. They need someone to supervise their cleaning staff. Hank felt his chest tighten. You're leaving? Yes, next week. It's a good opportunity, though leaving this place won't be easy. Her voice carried a gentle sadness. I've seen so many miracles here. Hank turned away from Lisa's watchful eyes, lowering his voice. I need to thank you proper, Mary Lou, for everything. You don't owe me any thanks, Mr. McAllister, but if you'd like to stop by my office before you leave. She gave him directions to the basement level where the maintenance staff worked. After hanging up, Hank turned to Lisa. Need to make one stop before we go, he said, picking up his bag. Won't take long. Lisa nodded, understanding in her eyes, despite her skepticism. I'll wait by the elevator. Hank moved through the hospital corridors, his steps slow but steady. The medallion pressed against his chest, reminding him of the moment everything had changed. The doctors could write their medical journals, could search for their scientific explanations. But Hank knew better. Sometimes healing came from places science couldn't reach, from a gentle smile, a quiet prayer, and hands that offered comfort while holding a mop. He reached the basement level, following Mary Lou's directions. His heart felt full with words he needed to say, gratitude he needed to express. Whatever force had brought Mary Lou into his life, chance, fate, or something more divine, Hank knew this wasn't just about physical healing anymore. Something deeper had changed within him, and he owed it to her to say goodbye properly. The steering wheel felt cool under Hank's rough hands as he guided his old pickup truck through downtown traffic. St. Michael's Hospital rose before him, its modern glass facade a stark contrast to the familiar brick building he'd left behind. The afternoon sun reflected off the windows, nearly blinding him as he searched for visitor parking. His daughter's words from breakfast echoed in his mind. "You don't owe her anything, Dad," Lisa had said, stirring her coffee. But Hank knew better. Some debts went deeper than money or obligation. They settled in your soul. The medallion hung heavy around his neck as he parked. He'd polished it that morning, his thick fingers working carefully over the worn metal. In his jacket pocket, he carried a small thank you card. The words inside were simple. He'd never been good with fancy expressions, but they came from his heart. Hank's boots scuffed against the polished floor as he entered the hospital lobby. Everything seemed too clean, too new. A young receptionist looked up from her computer, her professional smile faltering slightly at his appearance. The tattoos visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves, the graying beard, the well-worn leather jacket. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. "Looking for Mary Lou," Hank said, then cleared his throat. "She's head of maintenance now." Recognition softened the receptionist's face. "Oh, Mrs. Thompson. Yes, she started last week. Everyone loves her already." She reached for the phone. "Let me call down to her office." Hank shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how out of place he felt. A mother hurried past with 2 small children, giving him a wide berth. He was used to those looks, had worn them like armor for most of his life, but today they stung a little. "She's in her office," the receptionist said, hanging up the phone. "Take the service elevator to B2. Follow the signs for maintenance and housekeeping." The basement level was quieter, more industrial. The sound of Hank's footsteps echoed off concrete walls painted institutional beige. A cart loaded with cleaning supplies stood in the hallway, reminding him of how he'd first met Mary Lou. He found her office, really more of a converted storage room, at the end of the hall. The door was open, and Mary Lou sat at a small desk, reviewing paperwork. She looked different in her new supervisor's uniform, but her gentle presence remained unchanged. She looked up at his knock, and her face broke into a warm smile. "Mr. McAllister." She stood, smoothing her uniform. What a wonderful surprise. "Just wanted to see how you were settling in," Hank said, his gruff voice softening. "And a tank, please." Mary Lou gestured to a chair beside her desk. "It's good to see you looking so well, Hank. How are you feeling?" "Better than I deserve," he admitted, carefully lowering himself into the chair. "The doctor still can't explain it." Mary Lou's eyes twinkled. "Some things don't need explaining." She folded her hands on her desk. "And how are things with Lisa?" "We're talking more," Hank said. "Had breakfast together this morning. First time in years." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the card. "Wanted to give you this, to say thank you." Mary Lou accepted the card with both hands, treating it like something precious. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Yes," Hank said firmly. "I did." The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn Formica table. Hank sat across from Lisa, watching as she methodically stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic mug in a steady rhythm. His own cup sat untouched, growing cold. "I've been thinking," Hank started, his gravelly voice unusually soft. "Maybe we could spend more time together. You know, make up for lost time." Lisa's stirring stopped. She kept her eyes fixed on her coffee, her shoulders tense. "Lost time?" Her voice carried an edge that made Hank's stomach tighten. "That's what you're calling it now?" Hank shifted in the vinyl booth, the material squeaking beneath him. His weathered hands, covered in old engine grease that never quite washed away, fidgeted with a paper napkin. "I know I wasn't there when Mom was sick?" Lisa cut in, finally looking up. Her eyes, so like her mother's, were hard with years of hurt. "Or when I graduated college? Or when Tommy and I got divorced?" Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Hank's shoulders hunched slightly, his massive frame seeming to shrink. "I want to make things right, Lisa." "Right?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Dad, you can't just walk back into my life because you had some kind of spiritual awakening in the hospital. It doesn't work that way." The diner's usual morning bustle faded into background noise as Hank struggled to find the right words. A waitress approached their table, coffee pot in hand, but quickly retreated after catching the tension in the air. "I know I messed up," Hank said, his voice rough with emotion. "After your mom died, I didn't handle it well." "That's putting it mildly." Lisa's fingers tightened around her mug. "You disappeared into your garage, Dad. Buried yourself in engines and parts while I tried to put my life back together alone." Hank reached across the table, trying to bridge the gulf between them, but Lisa pulled back. The rejection stung more than any physical pain he'd endured in the hospital. "I'm trying here, Lisa," he pleaded, hating how desperate he sounded. "Well, maybe you should have tried 15 years ago." Lisa stood up, gathering her purse. She pulled out a few dollars and dropped them on the table. "I have to get to work." Hank watched helplessly as his daughter walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the diner's linoleum floor. Each step seemed to echo the years of distance between them. Later, in the hospital parking lot where he'd gone to visit Mary Lou, Hank walked aimlessly between the rows of cars. The concrete radiated heat from the afternoon sun, but he barely noticed. His mind replayed Lisa's words over and over. He stopped beside his pickup truck, resting a hand on its sun-warmed hood. The vehicle had been his constant companion for decades, something he could always fix, always understand. Unlike the complicated mess of human relationships, the medallion Mary Lou had given him felt heavy against his chest. He'd thought he was getting better. His body was healing after all. But this pain, this crushing weight of regret and rejection, felt worse than any physical ailment. A young family walked past, a father holding his little girl's hand as she skipped along. The sight made Hank's chest ache. He remembered when Lisa was that small, when she used to look at him like he hung the moon. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost that. Lost her. Standing in that parking lot, surrounded by strangers going about their day, Hank had never felt more alone. Hank's fingers trembled as he dialed another number from his worn address book. The pages were yellow with age, some entries crossed out, others smudged beyond recognition. He sat in his truck outside Joe's auto shop, where he'd worked for nearly 2 decades before everything fell apart. "Hello?" a gruff voice answered. "Mickey? It's Hank. Hank McAllister." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. "What do you want, McAllister?" Hank gripped the steering wheel with his free hand, steadying himself. "I've been thinking about the old days, about what happened with the shop money." "Save it." Mickey's voice turned cold. "You think you can call after 15 years and make it right? That money was meant for my kid's college fund." "I know, Mickey. I was messed up back then, after May died." "We were all hurting when May passed," Mickey cut in. "But you're the only one who decided to clean out the register and disappear for 3 months." The line went dead. Hank stared at his phone, his reflection dim in the dark screen. 3 more calls yielded similar results. Bill hung up as soon as he heard Hank's voice. Tommy let him talk for 5 minutes before saying he couldn't forgive and forget. Even Steve, his oldest friend, said some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. Rain started falling, soft drops hitting his windshield. Hank watched the water trail down the glass, feeling as lost as he had in the hospital bed. He'd thought facing death would be the hardest thing he'd ever do. But this, trying to make amends, facing the consequences of his actions, felt infinitely more difficult. He drove to Mary Lou's hospital, parking in the far corner of the lot. The rain had stopped, leaving everything with a fresh, clean smell that seemed to mock his dark mood. Inside, he wandered the halls aimlessly, not ready to face Mary Lou with his failures. Through a doorway, he caught sight of her in the children's ward. Mary Lou moved between the beds with quiet grace, emptying wastebaskets and wiping down surfaces, but it was more than just cleaning. She stopped at each bed, sharing a gentle word or smile with the young patients. A small boy with no hair was crying softly. Mary Lou paused in her work, setting aside her cleaning supplies. She knelt beside his bed, speaking softly. Whatever she said made the boy smile through his tears. She produced a small toy car from her pocket. Something simple, probably from a dollar store. And the child's face lit up like Christmas morning. Hank watched as she moved to the next bed, where a teenage girl sat looking out the window. Mary Lou touched her shoulder gently, and the girl turned. They talked for a few moments, and though Hank couldn't hear the words, he saw the girl's posture relax, saw hope replace despair in her young face. Every interaction was like this, small moments of grace, tiny miracles of kindness. Mary Lou didn't preach or make grand gestures. She simply offered what she had, her time, her compassion, her presence. And somehow that was enough to make a difference. Leaning against the wall, Hank felt something shift inside him. Here was someone who had every reason to be bitter, widowed young, struggling to raise a child alone. Yet she chose to give instead of withdraw, to heal instead of hurt. The contrast with his own choices over the years made his chest ache. He watched her work, moving with unhurried purpose despite the endless tasks before her. In her simple blue uniform, pushing her cart of cleaning supplies, she possessed a quiet dignity that all his tough guy posturing had never achieved. The phone's harsh ring cut through the quiet of Hank's living room. His heart lifted when he saw Lisa's name on the screen, hope rising in his chest like a warm bubble. "Lisa?" He tried to keep the eagerness out of his voice. "Dad." Her tone was clipped, professional. "I'm calling about getting together next week." "Sure, honey. I was thinking maybe we could grab lunch at that diner you used to love when—" "That's what I'm calling about," Lisa interrupted. "I won't be able to make it. Things are crazy." "At work right now, and I've got deadlines piling up." Hank's fingers tightened around the phone. "We could do dinner instead, or maybe the weekend." "Look, Dad." He heard her sigh, could picture her pinching the bridge of her nose like she did when she was frustrated. Just like her mother used to do. "I just don't have time right now. My plate is full, and I need to focus on my career." The hope in his chest deflated, leaving a familiar hollow ache. "I understand," he said, though he didn't. "Not really. Maybe another time?" "Maybe." Her voice softened slightly, but the distance remained. I've got to go. I have a meeting in 5 minutes." The line went dead before he could respond. Hank set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter like his heart just had. The silence in his house seemed heavier now, pressing in from all sides. He walked to the kitchen window, staring out at his overgrown backyard. The lawnmower sat rusting in the corner, untouched since his illness. Everything felt like that now. Neglected, falling apart, beyond repair. The phone rang again. This time it was Tommy, Mary Lou's son. Hank's greeting died in his throat as he listened to Tommy's worried voice. "She collapsed at work yesterday," Tommy explained, his words tumbling out fast and scared. "They admitted her right away, but the doctors, they can't figure out what's wrong." Hank's knees went weak. He grabbed the kitchen counter for support. "What are her symptoms?" "Extreme fatigue, fever that comes and goes, body aches. They've run tests, but nothing shows up. It's like..." Tommy paused. "It's like what you had, Mr. McAllister." The words hit Hank like a physical blow. He remembered the helplessness, the pain, the doctors' confused faces as test after test came back inconclusive. But most of all, he remembered Mary Lou's gentle presence, her quiet strength when everyone else had given up hope. "Which hospital?" Hank's voice was rough. "Sacred Heart. She's in room 412. Tommy hesitated. "She's been asking for you." After hanging up, Hank stood in his kitchen, the weight of both conversations pressing down on him. Lisa's rejection stung, but Mary Lou's illness terrified him in a way he hadn't expected. The thought of her suffering through what he had endured was unbearable. He looked at the clock. 8:45 p.m. Too late for visiting hours. Tomorrow, he decided. First thing tomorrow morning he would go to her. Maybe he couldn't fix things with Lisa, couldn't undo his past mistakes, but he could be there for Mary Lou the way she had been there for him. Hank walked to his bedroom and pulled out the small medallion Mary Lou had given him during his hospital stay. He held it tight in his calloused hand, feeling its familiar warmth, and made plans to visit her first thing in the morning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot as Hank pulled into a space. His hands trembled slightly as he switched off the engine. The familiar smell of antiseptic hit him as he walked through the sliding doors, bringing back memories of his own time here. Room 412 felt smaller than he expected. Mary Lou lay in the hospital bed, her usually warm complexion now pale and drawn. Various machines beeped steadily around her, monitoring her vital signs. She turned her head slightly at his approach, and a weak smile crossed her face. "Hank," she whispered. "You came." He settled into the chair beside her bed, noting how fragile she looked against the stark white sheets. "Of course I came. Tommy called me last night." A nurse entered, carrying a clipboard thick with papers. She checked Mary Lou's vitals before turning to address them both. "The doctor will be in shortly with the latest test results." Hank's stomach clenched. He recognized the look on the nurse's face, the same expression of carefully controlled concern he'd seen during his own illness. When the doctor arrived, his fears were confirmed. "The symptoms match exactly," the doctor explained, flipping through his charts. "The irregular fever patterns, the unexplained fatigue, the fluctuating vital signs. We're running the same battery of tests we did with Mr. McAllister's case." Mary Lou reached out and patted Hank's hand. Even now, she was trying to comfort him. The gesture made his chest tighten with guilt. "This is my fault," he muttered, once the doctor had left. "Somehow, whatever I had, it must have transferred to you when you were helping me." "Don't be silly," Mary Lou said, though her voice was weaker than before. "God works in mysterious ways, Hank. We don't always understand his plan." But Hank couldn't shake the feeling that this was cosmic payback. He'd been given a second chance at life, and somehow Mary Lou was paying the price. The unfairness of it gnawed at him. Throughout the day, Mary Lou's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her fever spiked, and her breathing became labored. Doctors and nurses rushed in and out, their faces growing more concerned with each visit. By evening, Mary Lou was barely conscious. The machines around her bed beeped with increasing urgency. Hank watched helplessly as a team of medical staff huddled around her, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "We need to place her in a medically induced coma," the lead doctor finally announced. "Her body needs time to stabilize." Hank felt the room spin. He steadied himself against the wall as they prepared the necessary medications. Mary Lou's son, Tommy, arrived just as they were beginning the procedure, his face etched with worry. "Mom," Tommy whispered, gripping her hand. Mary Lou's eyes fluttered open one last time before the medications took effect. She looked at Hank, and even in her weakened state, her gaze held the same kindness that had helped heal him months ago. Then her eyes closed, and the steady beep of the heart monitor became the only sound in the room. Hank sank into the chair beside her bed, his large frame seeming to collapse in on itself. The medallion she'd given him felt heavy in his pocket. He pulled it out, turning it over in his hands as he watched her chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. "I don't understand," he whispered to no one in particular. "Why her? Why not me?" The machines continued their rhythmic beeping, offering no answers to his questions. The faith that Mary Lou had helped nurture in him began to crumble, leaving behind only guilt and despair. The rhythmic beeping of machines filled room 412 as Hank sat slumped in the too small hospital chair. His weathered hands clasped together, knuckles white with tension. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He'd barely left Mary Lou's side in the past 48 hours. A nurse entered, checking Mary Lou's vitals for the 100th time. She gave Hank a sympathetic smile. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. McAllister?" He shook his head, his voice rough from disuse. "No, thank you." When the nurse left, Hank leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The tough ex-biker who'd spent decades building walls around his heart now felt them crumbling. Tears burned behind his eyes. "I don't know how to pray properly," he whispered to Mary Lou's still form. "Never was much good at it, but I'm trying now." His large hand engulfed her smaller one. "Please, God, don't take her." Tommy had gone home to rest, leaving Hank alone with his thoughts. The weight of guilt pressed down on him like a physical thing. He pulled out the medallion Mary Lou had given him, running his thumb over its worn surface. "You knew, didn't you?" he said softly. "You knew exactly what I needed, even when I pushed everyone away, even when I was at my worst." His voice cracked. "And now look at you, lying here because you helped a stubborn old fool like me." A memory surfaced. Mary Lou's voice, gentle but firm. "Sometimes healing isn't just about the body, Hank. It's about the heart, too." He'd dismissed her words then, too focused on his physical recovery. But sitting here now, watching her fight for her life, something shifted inside him. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. His own healing hadn't just been about surviving the mysterious illness. Mary Lou had seen past his gruff exterior, past the tattoos and the hard shell he'd built around himself. She'd reached the wounded soul beneath. The man who'd pushed away his daughter, who'd hidden from real connections, who'd been dying inside long before he got sick. Through her simple acts of kindness, her unwavering faith, she'd shown him what real strength looked like. It wasn't about being tough or independent. It was about having the courage to be vulnerable, to accept help, to believe in something bigger than yourself. Hank straightened in his chair, still holding Mary Lou's hand. His vision blurred with tears he no longer tried to hide. "I get it now," he whispered. "I finally understand what you were trying to teach me." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, looking at Lisa's number on the screen. He'd been so focused on his own pain, his own guilt, that he'd almost missed the most important lesson of all. The healing had to come from within. The medallion caught the afternoon light, sending a warm gleam across Mary Lou's peaceful face. Hank squeezed her hand gently. "I won't waste this second chance you gave me," he promised. "Whatever happens, I'll make it count. I'll make you proud." For the first time since Mary Lou had fallen ill, Hank felt a spark of something different beneath his grief. Purpose. He might not be able to heal her the way she'd healed him, but he could honor what she'd taught him. He could be the man she'd seen in him all along. Hank stared at his phone for what felt like hours, his thumb hovering over Lisa's number. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of Mary Lou's monitors. Finally, drawing a deep breath, he pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before Lisa answered, her voice guarded. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Hey, sweetheart." The old nickname felt strange on his tongue after so many years. I need to talk to you about something." There was a pause on the other end. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly." Hank shifted in his chair, glancing at Mary Lou's peaceful face. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, sitting here with Mary Lou." "The hospital janitor?" Lisa's tone held a mix of confusion and skepticism. "Yeah." Hank's voice softened. "She's more than that, though. Remember when I was sick, and nobody could figure out what was wrong?" "Of course I remember," Lisa replied. "The doctors were about to give up." Hank ran his fingers over the medallion in his pocket. "Something happened during that time, Lisa. Something I can't really explain." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Mary Lou, she saw something in me that I couldn't see myself. She prayed for me when everyone else had given up hope." "Dad," Lisa started, but Hank pressed on. "I know how it sounds. Hell, I wouldn't have believed it myself a few months ago." His voice grew thick with emotion. "But she showed me kindness when I least deserved it. She taught me that sometimes the toughest thing you can do is let someone help you." The line went quiet for a moment. When Lisa spoke again, her voice was softer. "You've changed." "I'm trying to," Hank admitted. "Being here with Mary Lou, watching her fight for her life, it's made me realize how much time I've wasted pushing people away, pushing you away." He heard Lisa take a shaky breath. "Dad, I know I wasn't there for you when you needed me," Hank continued, his voice cracking. "After your mom died, I shut down, built walls around myself, thought being tough meant not needing anybody." He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "Mary Lou showed me how wrong I was." "How?" Lisa asked quietly. "By just being there. By showing up every day with that gentle smile of hers, even when I was at my worst." Hank looked at Mary Lou's still form. "She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Made me want to be better." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I miss you, Lisa," Hank said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'd like a chance to try." He heard Lisa sniffle on the other end of the line. When she spoke, her voice was thick with tears. "I miss you too, Dad." Hank's heart swelled at those 4 simple words. Would you be willing to meet somewhere? Maybe grab a coffee or something?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Yeah," Lisa said softly. "I think I'd like that." "Really?" Hank couldn't keep the hope from his voice. "Really?" He could hear the ghost of a smile in her words. How about tomorrow morning? That little coffee shop near the hospital? I'll be there, Hank promised, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for calling, Dad, she replied gently. And thank Mary Lou for me when she wakes up. The morning sunlight filtered through the hospital window, casting a warm glow across Mary Lou's peaceful face. Hank sat in his usual chair, his large, weathered hands clasped together in prayer. The steady beeping of monitors had become a familiar rhythm over the past few days, but something felt different this morning. Maybe it was the conversation with Lisa yesterday, or maybe it was something more. Hank couldn't shake the feeling that change was in the air. He reached out and gently patted Mary Lou's hand, his touch careful and tender despite his rough exterior. You were right about so many things, he said softly, his voice gruff with emotion. About letting people in, about faith. He paused, watching her still face. About second chances. A nurse came in to check Mary Lou's vitals, her eyebrows rising slightly as she looked at the monitors. Her numbers are improving, she said, surprise evident in her voice. I'll get the doctor. Hank's heart quickened. He leaned forward in his chair, studying Mary Lou's face for any sign of change. The morning sun caught the silver threads in her hair, reminding him of the quiet dignity she'd always carried. Dr. Peterson arrived quickly, his white coat swishing as he moved around the bed, checking readings and making notes. This is remarkable, he muttered, shaking his head. Her vital signs are stabilizing. Blood pressure's normalizing, oxygen levels improving. Hank barely heard the medical jargon that followed. His eyes were fixed on Mary Lou's face, where he'd noticed the slightest flutter of her eyelids. His breath caught in his throat. Mary Lou, he whispered, taking her hand in his. Can you hear me? Her fingers twitched in his grip. The doctor fell silent, watching intently. The morning seemed to hold its breath as Mary Lou's eyelids fluttered again, more strongly this time. Slowly, like a flower opening to the sun, her eyes opened. They were clouded at first, unfocused, but then they cleared. Her gaze found Hank's face, and the corners of her mouth turned up in a weak but unmistakable smile. I knew you'd come for me, she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with warmth. Hank's vision blurred with tears. He squeezed her hand gently, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. All the prayers, all the hours spent by her bedside, all the hope he'd held on to. It had all led to this moment. The doctor was calling for nurses, ordering tests, but Hank barely registered any of it. All he could see was Mary Lou's smile. All he could feel was the gentle pressure of her hand in his. The woman who had helped heal his body and soul was coming back to them, just as he'd prayed she would. Welcome back, he managed to say through the lump in his throat. A tear rolled down his cheek and disappeared into his beard. He didn't bother to wipe it away. Mary Lou's smile widened slightly. Tears, she whispered. From the tough Hell's Angel? Hank let out a watery chuckle. Guess you've changed me more than I thought. The morning sun seemed to glow brighter, filling the room with golden light. The monitors beeped steadily, strong and sure, like a chorus celebrating Mary Lou's return. In that moment, Hank felt the full weight of the miracle he was witnessing, and his heart swelled with gratitude and joy. The coffee shop was quiet, tucked away in a corner of downtown. Hank sat across from Lisa, his large frame seeming out of place in the delicate cafe chair. Steam rose from his untouched cup as he watched his daughter stir her latte, her eyes fixed on the swirling liquid. I appreciate you meeting me, Hank said, his gravelly voice soft. The morning light caught the silver in his beard, making him look older, more vulnerable than usual. Lisa nodded, finally looking up. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, held years of hurt. Mary Lou's recovery. It made me think about a lot of things, she said. About second chances. Hank's hands, rough from years of mechanical work, wrapped around his coffee cup. I've done a lot of thinking, too, about the kind of father I was, the kind I wasn't. You were always somewhere else, Lisa said, her voice catching. Even when you were home, you weren't really there. After Mom died, she paused, collecting herself. After Mom died, it was like losing both parents. The words hit Hank like a physical blow. He remembered those dark days after May's passing, how he'd retreated into himself, leaving his teenage daughter to navigate her grief alone. I know sorry isn't enough, he said, but I am. More than you'll ever know. Do you know what it was like? Lisa's voice trembled. Being 16, planning Mom's funeral because you couldn't even get out of bed, having to be the grown-up when I was still a kid myself? Hank's chest tightened. He'd never allowed himself to see it from her perspective, too wrapped up in his own pain. No, baby girl, I didn't. No. I was drowning in my own grief. I couldn't see past it. Every time I needed you, Lisa continued, tears now flowing freely. Every school event, every heartbreak, every milestone, you weren't there, and I learned to stop expecting you to be. Hank reached across the table, hesitating before touching her hand. When she didn't pull away, he covered her smaller hand with his. I failed you, he admitted. I was supposed to be your protector, your support. Instead, I let my pain become an excuse. Lisa wiped her eyes with her free hand. I wanted to hate you for it. Sometimes I thought I did, but seeing you with Mary Lou, seeing how you've changed, it made me wonder if maybe there's still hope for us. Hank squeezed her hand gently. I can't change the past, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your future, really part of it this time. Lisa looked at their joined hands, her smooth one beneath his calloused palm. It won't be easy, she warned. There's a lot of hurt to work through. I know, Hank nodded, but I'm ready to do the work. No more running away. Lisa stood up suddenly, and for a moment Hank feared she was leaving. Instead, she moved around the table and for the first time in years, wrapped her arms around her father's broad shoulders. Hank pulled her close, holding her like he should have all those years ago. He felt her tears soaking into his shirt, and his own rolled down into his beard. They stayed that way for a long moment, father and daughter, beginning to bridge the chasm between them. As they embraced, Hank felt a weight he'd carried for years starting to lift. The road ahead would be long, but they had taken the first step together. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow across Mary Lou's recovery room. Hank sat in the chair beside her bed, his large frame hunched forward as he watched her rest. The steady beeping of monitors filled the quiet space, a reassuring rhythm that told him she was getting stronger each day. Mary Lou's eyes fluttered open, and a gentle smile crossed her face when she saw him. You're here again, she said softly. Where else would I be? Hank's gruff voice was tender. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, his weathered hands moving with unexpected gentleness. You know, Mary Lou said, shifting to face him better. When I first saw you in that hospital room months ago, I knew God had a plan. Hank's throat tightened with emotion. I wasn't exactly the friendliest patient. No, she chuckled weakly, but underneath all that gruffness, I saw someone hurting, someone who needed more than just medical healing. The truth of her words struck him deeply. He thought about how different he'd been then, angry, isolated, pushing away anyone who tried to get close. "You saw right through me," he admitted. "That's not me," Mary Lou said, reaching for his hand. "That's God's love, working through me. I just listened to what my heart was telling me." Hank held her fragile hand in his, marveling at how such seemingly small acts of kindness had changed everything. "You did more than just pray for me, Mary Lou. You showed me what real faith looks like, what real kindness means." "Sometimes," she said, her voice growing stronger, "the greatest miracles aren't the physical healings. They're the changes that happen in our hearts." Hank nodded, thinking about his reconciliation with Lisa, the walls he'd finally let down. "I never thought I deserved a second chance," he confessed. "After May died, I convinced myself I was better off alone. Safer that way. And now—" Mary Lou's eyes were bright with understanding. "Now I know that wasn't living, it was hiding. Your prayers, your kindness, they didn't just save my life, they showed me how to live again." Mary Lou squeezed his hand. "That's what faith does. It opens doors we thought were locked forever." A comfortable silence fell between them. Hank watched as a nurse came in to check Mary Lou's vitals, noting with relief how much stronger she seemed today. The fear that had gripped him when she first fell ill was fading, replaced by a steady hope he'd learned from her example. "You know what amazes me most?" he said after the nurse left. "How you never gave up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. You just kept showing up with that quiet strength of yours." "That's what love does," Mary Lou replied simply. "It shows up. It persists. It believes in the good, even when it's hard to see." Hank felt tears prick at his eyes, something that would have embarrassed him months ago. Now, he let them fall freely. "I don't know how to thank you for that." "Live it forward," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Share that same love with others. That's all the thanks I need." He sat there, holding her hand, overwhelmed by gratitude for this remarkable woman who had shown him the way back to life. Through her simple acts of faith and kindness, she had helped him find not just physical healing, but something far more precious: the courage to love and be loved again. The morning started with a jarring phone call. Hank had just settled into his usual chair beside Mary Lou's bed when her doctor entered with a concerned expression. "We found some irregularities in your latest tests," the doctor explained, his voice gentle but firm. "There seems to be an infection developing that's resistant to our current treatment." Mary Lou took the news with characteristic grace, but Hank noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. The sight made his chest tighten with worry. "What does that mean exactly?" Hank asked, his voice rougher than intended. "It means we need to try a more aggressive treatment approach," the doctor replied. "There are risks involved, and the recovery period could be longer than we initially thought." Hank watched Mary Lou's face, searching for any sign of fear, but she maintained her serene expression. Only the slight tightening around her eyes betrayed her concern. "Whatever needs to be done," Hank said firmly, standing up to his full height. "I'm not going anywhere." After the doctor left, Mary Lou turned to him with gentle concern. "Hank, you don't have to—" "Don't," he cut her off, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't tell me what I don't have to do." He pulled his chair closer to her bed, his massive frame making the furniture seem small. "You were there for me when nobody else was. When I didn't deserve it. I'm staying right here." Mary Lou's eyes welled with tears. "You've come so far," she whispered. The words triggered something deep inside Hank. Memories flooded back, the countless times he'd pushed people away, the years wasted in anger and isolation. He thought about May, his late wife, and how he'd withdrawn completely after her death, leaving Lisa to deal with her grief alone. "I have to tell you something," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Something I've never told anyone." Mary Lou reached for his hand, her touch warm and encouraging. "The night May died," he continued, each word feeling like gravel in his throat. "I wasn't there. I was at a bar, drowning my sorrows because we'd had another fight. She tried calling me, but I ignored the phone." His hands shook as he spoke. "By the time I got home, it was too late. The aneurysm, it happened so fast." The confession hung heavy in the air. Mary Lou's grip on his hand tightened. "All these years," he went on, "I've carried that guilt, used it as an excuse to push everyone away, especially Lisa. I couldn't face her knowing I wasn't there when her mother needed me most." "Oh, Hank," Mary Lou's voice was soft with compassion. "But being here with you, watching you face everything with such faith and grace." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "It's shown me that I've been punishing myself, and everyone else, for far too long." Mary Lou's eyes shone with understanding. "The past doesn't define you, Hank. It's what you choose to do with today that matters." Hank nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The guilt wasn't completely gone, but for the first time, he felt he could look at it without being crushed by it. He straightened in his chair, his jaw set with determination. "That's why I'm not leaving," he said firmly. "Whatever comes next, whatever we have to face, I'm staying right here. No more running away." Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. Hank shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his large frame seeming out of place among the Sunday morning congregation. Mary Lou sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm, a quiet anchor in this unfamiliar territory. The church wasn't fancy, just a modest building with simple decorations and well-worn hymnals in each pew. But there was something about the atmosphere that made Hank's chest tighten with emotion. The soft music from the organ filled the space, and the voices of the choir rose in harmony. "You okay?" Mary Lou whispered, noticing his unease. Hank nodded, though his throat felt tight. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been in a church. Must have been May's funeral, and that memory still stung. But this felt different. The peaceful atmosphere wrapped around him like a warm blanket. The pastor spoke about miracles, not the dramatic kind from biblical stories, but the quiet ones that happened every day, the kind that came through acts of kindness and unexpected healing. Hank found himself leaning forward, hanging on every word. "Sometimes," the pastor said, his voice carrying through the hushed sanctuary, "our greatest miracles come disguised as ordinary people doing extraordinary things." Hank glanced at Mary Lou, who was listening intently, her face serene. He thought about how she'd appeared in his hospital room months ago, just another cleaning lady with a mop and bucket. Who could have known then that she would become the miracle he needed? The congregation stood to sing, and Mary Lou gently tugged at Hank's arm. He rose, towering over most of the people around him. The hymn was familiar, something he'd heard before but never really listened to. The words spoke of amazing grace and being found when lost. As the voices rose around him, Hank felt something crack inside his chest. Not the physical pain he'd known during his illness, but something deeper. The walls he'd built around his heart began to crumble. He thought about his own recovery, how the doctors had been baffled by his sudden improvement. They'd called it unexplainable, a medical anomaly. But standing here now, surrounded by singing voices and holding Mary Lou's hand, Hank understood it hadn't been unexplainable at all. Tears pricked at his eyes, and for once, he didn't try to hold them back. He remembered Mary Lou's quiet prayers over his hospital bed, her unwavering faith even when his situation seemed hopeless. He thought about the peace that had washed over him whenever she was near. The music swelled, and Hank found himself humming along, his deep voice joining the chorus. Mary Lou squeezed his hand, and when he looked down at her, she was smiling through her own tears. "This is just the beginning," she whispered, barely audible above the music. Hank nodded, understanding flowing through him like a river. His healing hadn't just been about getting better physically. It had been about opening his heart to something bigger than himself, to faith, to love, to the possibility of change. As the final notes of the hymn faded away, Hank remained standing, his head bowed. For the first time in his life, he felt truly humble, truly grateful. The tough ex-biker who'd spent years pushing people away was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the power of grace. In that moment, surrounded by the gentle murmur of prayers and Mary Lou's steady presence beside him, Hank made a silent promise to himself. He would embrace this new path, this journey of healing that had only just begun. His old life of isolation and bitterness was over. The morning sun painted the hospital corridor in warm, golden light as Hank pushed Mary Lou's wheelchair toward the exit. Lisa walked beside them, carrying a bouquet of yellow daisies and a small gift bag. The same hallways that had once felt cold and sterile now seemed to glow with promise. Mary Lou sat straight in the wheelchair, her silver hair neatly combed and her favorite blue cardigan draped over her shoulders. Though she insisted she could walk, hospital policy required the wheelchair. Her eyes sparkled with joy as she clutched the discharge papers in her lap. "You really don't have to fuss over me like this," Mary Lou protested softly, but her smile betrayed how touched she was by their attention. "After everything you've done for us?" Lisa adjusted the flowers in her arms. "This is the least we can do." Her voice carried a warmth that would have been unimaginable just months ago, when she'd stood in these same halls, angry and distant from her father. Hank's large hands gripped the wheelchair handles gently. "Mary Lou, you brought me back to life in more ways than one. You helped me find my daughter again." His voice was gruff with emotion. "Sometimes angels wear hospital uniforms instead of wings." Several nurses and orderlies stopped to wish Mary Lou well as they made their way through the hospital. She'd touched so many lives during her time here, not just Hank's. Each goodbye was met with her characteristic humble smile and quiet thank you. At the nurses' station, they paused as Mary Lou's favorite nurse, Sarah, rushed over to give her a hug. "We're going to miss you around here," Sarah said, wiping away a tear. "Who's going to remind us to have faith when things get tough?" "You'll do just fine," Mary Lou assured her, patting her hand. "Sometimes we just need to remember that miracles happen every day, right here in these halls." As they approached the hospital entrance, Lisa stepped ahead to open the doors. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of blooming spring flowers from the hospital garden. Hank carefully helped Mary Lou to her feet, supporting her elbow as she stood. "I never thought I'd be leaving here like this," Mary Lou admitted, looking between Hank and Lisa. "With a family." Lisa's eyes welled up with tears. "You helped us become a family again," she said, reaching for her father's hand. Hank squeezed it tight, his own eyes glistening. Mary Lou smoothed her cardigan, looking at the father and daughter with pride. "God works in mysterious ways," she said softly. "Sometimes he brings people together in the most unexpected places." They stood there for a moment, the three of them, as other patients and visitors moved around them. Through the glass doors, they could see the parking lot where Hank's truck waited, freshly washed for the occasion. The same lot where he'd once paced in frustration, feeling lost and alone. "Well," Mary Lou said, straightening her shoulders. "Shall we?" Hank offered her his arm, while Lisa gathered the flowers and gift bag. Together they stepped through the automatic doors into the sunshine. The hospital that had been a place of pain and uncertainty now stood as a testament to healing, not just of bodies, but of hearts and relationships too. They walked slowly, matching Mary Lou's pace, past the flower beds where spring blooms nodded in the breeze. A group of sparrows scattered from a nearby tree, their wings catching the sunlight. The simple beauty of the moment wasn't lost on any of them. 3 weeks after Mary Lou's release from the hospital, the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Hank's newly cleaned living room. Gone were the dusty surfaces and cluttered corners that had marked his years of isolation. In their place stood fresh flowers in a vase Lisa had brought over, and family photos she'd dug out of storage. Hank watched from his worn leather armchair as Lisa moved around his kitchen, preparing dinner with the same determined focus she brought to everything. The sound of pots clanking and the smell of home cooking filled the small house. It was a sound he hadn't heard since May passed away. "You know, Dad," Lisa called out, "these cabinets could use some organizing." She wasn't criticizing. Her tone carried the warmth of someone who wanted to help, not judge. "Suppose they could," Hank agreed, running a hand through his gray beard. "Been meaning to get around to that." Mary Lou sat in the chair opposite him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She'd been invited for dinner, and her presence seemed to make the house feel more complete somehow. Her eyes crinkled with joy as she watched father and daughter interact. "Remember when Mom used to label everything in the kitchen?" Lisa asked, pulling out an old pot. "Every container, every shelf?" Hank chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to surprise even him. Your mother was nothing if not organized. The memory didn't sting like it used to. Instead, it felt warm, like an old friend coming to visit. Lisa appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I found her old label maker in the basement last week. Thought maybe we could spend Sunday afternoon putting this place back in order." She hesitated, then added, "If you want." "I'd like that," Hank said softly, meeting his daughter's eyes. "I'd like that a lot." Mary Lou smiled, watching the exchange. She'd seen countless moments of healing in her years at the hospital, but this one felt special. The tough exterior of the ex-biker and the protective shell of his corporate daughter had both cracked open, allowing love to flow between them again. "Your mother would be proud," Mary Lou said gently. "Of both of you." Lisa's eyes welled up, but she quickly turned back to the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready. Dad, could you set the table?" Hank rose from his chair, his movements slower but steadier than they'd been in the hospital. As he pulled plates from the cabinet, Lisa worked beside him, stirring a pot of her mother's old recipe for beef stew. They moved around each other with growing ease, no longer awkward strangers but family finding their rhythm again. "I've been thinking," Lisa said, testing the seasoning in the stew. "Maybe we could make this a regular thing. Sunday dinners?" Hank paused, a stack of plates in his large hands. The suggestion hung in the air like a precious, fragile thing. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I'd really like that." Mary Lou watched from her chair as they finished preparing the meal together. The kitchen light cast a warm glow over the scene. Father and daughter, moving forward together, the weight of old hurts beginning to lift from their shoulders. It wasn't perfect, and there would still be difficult moments ahead, but the foundation of their relationship was growing stronger with each passing day. The aroma of fresh-baked rolls and hearty stew filled the house, replacing the emptiness that had lived there for so long. As Hank and Lisa worked together to put the finishing touches on dinner, Their movement spoke of new beginnings and hearts opening to possibility once again. Mary Lou pushed her cleaning cart down the familiar hallway of her old hospital, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished floor. The morning light filtered through the large windows, casting warm patches across the corridor where she had first met Hank months ago. She paused outside room 412, now occupied by a young mother recovering from surgery, and smiled at the memories that flooded back. Her daily routine hadn't changed, the same corridors, the same gentle greetings to patients and staff, but something felt different. The medal she always wore around her neck, identical to the one she'd given Hank, caught the sunlight as she bent to pick up a dropped tissue. "Good morning, Mary Lou," called Dr. Stevens as he passed. "How's our miracle worker today?" She shook her head with a modest smile. "Just doing my job, doctor. The real miracles come from somewhere else." As she worked her way through her morning duties, Mary Lou thought about Hank and Lisa. Their story had touched something deep in her heart, reminding her of why she'd chosen to return to this hospital instead of accepting other offers. Here, in these halls, she'd witnessed countless moments of healing, not just of bodies, but of souls. The sound of heavy boots on the floor made her look up from where she was mopping. There stood Hank, his imposing frame softened by the gentle expression on his face. His beard was neatly trimmed now, and he wore a clean flannel shirt instead of his old leather jacket. "Thought I might find you here," he said, his gruff voice carrying across the quiet hallway. Mary Lou leaned her mop against the wall. "Hank McAllister, what brings you back to these halls?" He shifted his weight, reaching into his pocket to pull out the medallion she'd given him during his stay. It gleamed in his large, calloused hand. "Wanted to show you something," he said, turning it over. "Had it engraved?" Mary Lou stepped closer, adjusting her glasses to read the tiny script on the back. "Faith heals what time cannot." "Lisa helped me pick out the words," Hank explained, his voice growing softer. "Thought you should know what your kindness did for us." They moved to a quiet corner near the window, where sunlight streamed in and cast long shadows on the floor. Mary Lou's cart stood forgotten nearby as they shared the peaceful moment. "You know," Mary Lou said, smoothing her uniform, "sometimes the Lord works in ways we least expect. When I first came into your room that day, I was just doing my job." Hank nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Funny how things work out. Never thought a tough old biker like me would find healing through a hospital janitor's prayers." His words carried no judgment, only gratitude. "The heart knows what it needs," Mary Lou replied, touching her own medallion. "Sometimes it just takes the right moment for us to listen." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the hospital life flow around them. Nurses hurried past with charts, visitors carried flowers and get-well balloons, and somewhere down the hall, a baby's first cry echoed through the corridors. It was the sound of life continuing, of healing happening in all its forms. Mary Lou glanced at Hank, seeing not the hardened ex-biker who had first occupied room 412, but a man transformed by love and faith. The change in him wasn't just physical. It shone in his eyes, in the way he held himself, in the peace that seemed to radiate from within. Hank watched as Mary Lou finished wiping down the last window in the corridor. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the freshly cleaned floor, and the smell of disinfectant hung in the air. He knew this would be one of his last visits. Life was pulling them in different directions now. "You're doing that thing again," Mary Lou said, not turning around as she worked. "Thinking too hard about something." Hank chuckled, the sound echoing softly in the quiet hallway. "Can't hide much from you, can I?" She turned to face him, tucking her cleaning cloth into her apron pocket. Her eyes were warm and knowing, just as they'd been that first day she'd entered his hospital room. "The Lord blessed me with good intuition," she said with a gentle smile. "Been thinking about everything that's happened," Hank admitted, leaning against the wall. His fingers absently touched the medallion around his neck. "Never thought I'd be standing here months later feeling like a different person." Mary Lou wheeled her cart to the side and sat down on one of the waiting room chairs. Hank joined her, his large frame making the small chair creak slightly. "You know," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "when I first saw you in that hospital bed, all I could think was how much pain you were carrying. Not just the physical kind." Hank nodded slowly. "Was carrying it for so long, I didn't even notice the weight anymore." He paused, looking down at his weathered hands. "Until you helped me set it down." "The Lord did that," Mary Lou corrected gently. "I was just blessed to be part of the journey." "You were more than that," Hank said, his voice growing thick with emotion. "You showed me what real faith looks like, not just in God, but in people, in second chances." Through the window, they could see the hospital garden where patients took their daily walks. A young mother pushed her IV stand while her little girl skipped beside her, both of them laughing in the sunshine. "Lisa called me this morning," Hank continued, watching the scene outside. "Asked me to Sunday dinner with her family. First time in years." He turned to Mary Lou, his eyes glistening. "That's because of you." Mary Lou reached over and patted his hand. "That's because you were ready to heal, Hank, ready to let love back in." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hospital bustling around them. A nurse walked by, pushing a wheelchair, and somewhere down the hall, a phone rang at the nurse's station. "I won't be coming by as much anymore," Hank finally said, voicing what they both knew. "Lisa and I are working on rebuilding what we lost. Takes time, being there." Mary Lou nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's exactly where you need to be." "But I want you to know," Hank said, his voice firm, "what you did for me, what you showed me about faith and kindness, I'll carry that with me always." "And I'll keep you in my prayers," Mary Lou replied, standing up. "Just like I did that first day." Hank stood too, towering over her small frame. But there was a gentleness in his posture now, a softness that hadn't been there before. He touched the medallion one last time, a gesture that had become habit. "God bless you, Mary Lou," he said quietly. "Thank you for showing me the way back to life." Mary Lou smiled, her eyes twinkling. "God bless you too, Hank McAllister. Now go be with your family." Hank turned and walked down the corridor, his steps sure and steady. The weight of his past no longer dragged at his shoulders, and his heart felt light in his chest. He was healed, not just in body but in spirit, and ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The morning sun painted long shadows across the sidewalk as Hank and Lisa walked side by side. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and fresh coffee from the nearby diner. Hank's weathered hands were tucked into his jacket pockets, his stride matching his daughter's shorter steps. "You know, Dad," Lisa said, breaking their comfortable silence, "I never thought we'd be here like this." She gestured between them with a slight smile. "Just walking and talking." Hank nodded, his thick beard catching the sunlight. "Me neither, sweetheart. Spent too many years thinking I didn't deserve this." They passed a young mother pushing a stroller, and Lisa watched as her father tipped his head in greeting, a simple gesture that spoke volumes about how much he'd changed. The old Hank would have kept his head down, avoided eye contact. "Mary Lou helped you see differently?" Lisa asked, though she already knew the answer. "She showed me that sometimes the biggest miracles come wrapped in the simplest packages," Hank replied, his voice gravelly but warm. "A kind word, a prayer, someone believing in you when you've stopped believing in yourself. They paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Lisa studied her father's profile. The strong jaw, the lines around his eyes that seemed softer now, less harsh. "You know what I remember from when I was little?" she said suddenly. Hank turned to her, curious. "You used to fix my bike whenever the chain came off," Lisa continued. "You never said much, just grabbed your tools and fixed it. I'd watch you work, and even though you were quiet, I felt safe." The light changed, and they crossed together. Hank felt a lump forming in his throat. "I wish I'd known how to show you that more often," he admitted. "How to be there in the ways that really mattered." "We're here now," Lisa said firmly, linking her arm through his. "That's what counts." They rounded the corner, and there was Mary Lou, waiting outside the hospital entrance where they'd agreed to meet. She wore her usual clean uniform, her gray hair neat beneath her cap, and her face lit up at the sight of them. "Well, if this isn't a beautiful sight," Mary Lou called out, her voice carrying the warmth of summer despite the cool morning air. As they approached her, Hank felt the familiar sense of gratitude wash over him. This small woman, with her quiet strength and unwavering faith, had helped bridge the gap between him and his daughter, a gap he'd once thought was too wide to cross. "Ready for breakfast?" Lisa asked, reaching out to hug Mary Lou. "Dad says you make the best pancakes in town." "Oh, he's just being kind," Mary Lou laughed, but her eyes sparkled with pleasure. "No, I'm being honest," Hank corrected, his gruff voice softening. "Something else you taught me the value of." The three of them stood there for a moment, connected by more than just circumstance, bound by the invisible threads of healing, forgiveness, and love. The morning sun climbed higher, casting their shadows behind them as they began walking together toward Mary Lou's house. Lisa's arm remained linked with her father's, while Mary Lou walked on his other side, her presence as steady and comforting as ever. Their footsteps fell into an easy rhythm. Three people who had found their way to each other through pain and healing, now moving forward together into the light of a new day. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.